Chapter 4, in which there are answers, although not necessarily to the right questions. Jared woke up to the sound of Mallory's screaming. He jumped out of bed and rushed down the hall past Simon and into his sister's room. Long pieces of her hair had been knotted to the brass headboard. Her face was red. But the worst part was the strange pattern of bruises that decorated her arms. Their mother was seated on the mattress, her fingers tugging at the knots. "What happened?" Jared asked. "Just chop it off. Just chop it," Mallory sobbed. "Cut it off. I want to get out of this bed. I want out of this house. I hate this place." "Who did this?" Their mother looked at Jared angrily. "I don't know." Jared glanced at Simon standing in the doorway, looking puzzled. It must have been the thing in the walls. Their mother's eyes got huge. It was scary. "Jared Grace, I saw you arguing with your sister last night." "Mom, I didn't do it, honest." He was shocked that she thought he would do something like this. He and Mallory were always fighting, but it didn't mean anything. "Get the scissors, Mom," Mallory yelled. "Both of you, out. Jared, I will talk to you later." Mrs. Grace turned back to her daughter. Jared left the room, his heart pounding. When he thought about Mallory's knotted hair, he couldn't contain a shiver. "You think that thing did it, don't you?" Simon asked as they entered the bedroom. Jared looked at his brother in dismay. "Don't you?" Simon nodded. "I keep thinking about that poem I found," Jared said. "It's the only clue we have. How is a stupid poem going to help?" "I don't know," Jared sighed. "You're the smart one. You should be figuring this out. How come nothing happened to us or to Mom?" Jared hadn't even thought about that. "I don't know," he said again. Simon gave him a long look. "Well, what do you think?" Jared asked. Simon started out the door. "I don't know what I think. I'm going to try and catch some crickets." Jared watched him go and wondered what he could do. Could he really solve anything by himself? Getting dressed, he thought about the poem. Up and up and up again was the simplest line, but what did it mean exactly? Up in the house? Up on the roof? Up in a tree? Maybe the poem was just something that an old, dead relative was keeping around, something that wasn't going to help at all. But since Simon was feeding his animals and Mallory was being freed from her bed, he had nothing better to do than wonder how far up and up and up again he needed to go. So, okay, maybe it wasn't the easiest clue after all, but Jared figured it couldn't hurt to go up, past the second floor, to the attic. The stairs were worn clean of their paint, and several times the boards he stepped on creaked so dramatically that Jared was afraid they were going to snap from his weight. The attic level was a vast room with a slanted ceiling and a gaping hole in the floor on one end. Through it he could see down into one of the unusable bedrooms. Old garment bags hung from a clothesline of thin wire stretching across the width of the attic. Birdhouses hung in profusion from the rafters, and a dressmaker's dummy stood alone in a corner, a hat over its knobbed head. And in the center of the room there was a spiral staircase, up and up and up again. Jared took the stairs 2 at a time. It says up and up and up again. The room he entered was bright and small. There were windows on all sides, and when he looked out, he could see the chipped and worn slate of the roof below him. He could see his mother's station wagon out in the gravel driveway. He could even see the carriage house and the long lawn that ran down into the woods. This must be the part of the house that had the weird iron fencing on top of it. What a great place! Even Mallory would be impressed when he brought her up here. Maybe it would make her less upset about her hair. There wasn't much in the room. An old trunk, a small stool, a Victrola, and rolls of faded fabric. Jared sat down, pulled the crumpled poem from his pocket, and read it through again. "In a man's torso you will find my secret to all mankind." Those lines bothered him. He didn't want to find an old, dead body, even if there was something really cool inside it. The bright yellow sunlight splashing across the floor reassured him. In movies, bad things seldom happened in broad daylight, but he still hesitated to open the trunk. Maybe he should go outside and get Simon to come up with him. But what if the chest was empty? Or what if the poem had nothing to do with Mallory's bruises and knotted hair? Not knowing what else to do, he knelt down and brushed cobwebs and grime from the top of the trunk. Heavy strips of rusted metal striped the rotting leather. At least he could take a look. Maybe the clue would be more obvious if he knew what was inside. Taking a breath, Jared pushed up the lid. It was full of very old, moth-eaten clothes. Underneath, there was a pocket watch on a long chain, a tattered cap, and a leather satchel full of old, odd-looking pencils and cracked bits of charcoal. Nothing in the trunk looked like it was a secret for mankind or anybody else. Nothing looked like a dead body either. In a man's torso you will find my secret to all mankind. He looked down at the contents of the chest again, and it hit him. He was looking at a chest. A man's torso would be his chest. Jared groaned in frustration. How could he be right and still have nothing to show for it? There was nothing good in the chest, and the other lines of the poem made no sense at all. If false and true can be the same, you will soon know of my fame. How could that be answered with something real? It sounded like a word game. What could be false, though? Something about the situation? Something about the stuff in the chest? The chest itself? He thought about chests, and chests made him think about pirates on a beach burying treasure deep in the cool sand. Buried underneath! Not a false chest, but a chest with a false bottom. Looking carefully, he could see that the inside seemed higher than it should be. Had he really solved the riddle? Jared got down on his knees and began to push all over the floor of the trunk, threading his fingers through the dust to look for seams that might allow him to pull an unseen compartment open. When he found nothing, he began to touch the outside, pawing over the box. Finally, when he pressed 3 fingers against the edge of the left side, a compartment popped open. Excited beyond reason, Jared pressed his hand inside. The only contents were a squarish bundle wrapped in a dirty cloth. He took it out, untied it, and started to unfold the fabric from an old, crumbling book that smelled like burnt paper. Embossed on the brown leather, the title read, Arthur Spiderwick's Field Guide to the Fantastical World Around You. The cover was ragged at the edges, and as he opened it, he noticed that it was full of watercolor sketches. The writing had been done in ink, grown smudged and spotted with age and water damage. He flipped the pages quickly, glancing at notes tucked into the volume. These were written in a spidery hand very like the writing of the riddle. This right here, this is the Victrola. This is a very old way they played records, like music. Very, very old. The strangest thing. The strangest thing, however, was the subject matter. The book was full of information about fairies. He just wanted to keep reading. Chapter 5, in which Jared reads a book and sets a trap. Mallory and Simon were out on the lawn, fencing, when Jared found them. Mallory's ponytail stuck out of the back of her fencing helmet, and Jared could see that it was shorter than it had once been. She was apparently trying to make up for her earlier weakness by ruthless fencing. Simon couldn't seem to get a strike in at all. He was being backed against the side of the broken-down carriage house, his parries becoming increasingly desperate. "I found something!" Jared called. Simon turned his helmeted head. Mallory took that opportunity to strike, pushing the rubber tip of her fencing foil against his chest. "That's 3 to zip," Mallory said. "I creamed you." "You cheated," he complained. "You allowed yourself to become distracted," Mallory countered. Simon pulled the helmet off his head, flung it down, and looked at Jared. "Thanks a lot." "Sorry," Jared said automatically. You're the one that always fences with her. You're the one that always fences with her. I just came out here to catch tadpoles." Simon scowled. "Well, I was busy. Just because I don't have a bunch of dumb animals to take care of doesn't mean I can't be busy," Jared shot back. "Just shut up, both of you." Mallory took off her own helmet. Her face was flushed. "What did you find?" Jared tried to recapture some of his earlier excitement. "A book in the attic. It's about fairies. Real fairies. Look, they're ugly." Mallory took the book out of his hands and looked it over. "This is baby stuff, a storybook." "It's not," Jared said defensively. "It's a field guide, like for birds, so you know how to spot the different kinds." "You think a fairy tied my hair to my bed?" Mallory asked. "Mom thinks you did. She thinks you've been acting weird ever since Dad left, like getting into all those fights at school." Simon didn't say anything. "But you don't think that." Jared hoped she would agree. And you always get into fights. Mallory took a deep breath. I don't think you're stupid enough to have done it, she said, holding up a fist to show what she was going to do to whatever, holding up a fist. Good Lord. Holding up a fist to show what she was going to do to whatever had, but I don't think it was fairies either. Over dinner, their mother was oddly quiet as she slid chicken and mashed potatoes onto their plates. Mallory wasn't talking that much either, but Simon was going on and on about the tadpoles he had found and how they were going to be frogs in no time because they already had little arms. Jared had seen them. They had a long way to go. What Simon called arms looked a lot more like fish zits. Mom, Jared said finally, do we have a relative named Arthur? Their mother looked up suspiciously from her dinner. No, I don't think so. Why do you ask? I was just wondering, Jared mumbled. What about Spiderwick? That's your great-aunt Lucinda's surname, his mother said. It was my mother's maiden name. Maybe Arthur was one of her relatives? Now, tell me why you want to know all this. I just found some of his stuff in the attic, that's all, Jared said. In the attic? His mother almost spilled her tea. Jared Grace, as you know, half of the entire second floor is so rotted that if you step wrong, you'll find yourself in the downstairs parlor. I stayed on the safe side, Jared protested. We don't know if there is a safe side in the attic. I don't want anyone playing up there, especially you, she said, looking right at Jared. He bit his lip. Especially you. Jared didn't say a thing for the rest of dinner. Are you going to read that all night? Simon asked. He was sitting on his side of the room. Jeffrey and Lemon Drop were running around on the comforter, and his new tadpoles were set up in one of the fish tanks. So what if I do? Jared asked. With each crumbling page, Jared was learning strange facts. Could there really be brownies in his house? Pixies in his yard? Nixies in the stream out back? The book made them so real, he didn't want to talk to anyone right now, not even Simon. He just wanted to keep reading. I don't know, Simon said. I thought maybe you'd be bored by now. You don't usually like to read. Jared looked up and blinked. It was true. Simon was the reader. Jared mostly just got into trouble. He turned a page. I can read if I want to. Simon yawned. Are you worried about falling asleep? I mean, about what happened tonight? Or what happened? I mean, about what might happen tonight? Look at this. Jared flipped to a page close to the front. There's this fairy called a brownie. Like Girl Scouts? I don't know, Jared said. Look like this. Look. He pushed the page in front of Simon. On the yellowed paper was an ink drawing of a little man, posed with a feather duster made from a badminton birdie and a straight pin. Next to it was a hunched figure, also small, but this one held a piece of broken glass. What's with that? Simon pointed to the second figure, intrigued despite himself. This Arthur guy says it's a Bogart. See, brownies are these helpful guys, but then if you make them mad, they go crazy. They start doing all these bad things and you can't stop them. Then they become Bogarts. That's what I think we have. Look at this. You think we made it mad by messing up its house? Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it was kind of wacky before that. I mean, look at this guy. Jared pointed to the brownie. He's not the type to live in a skeevy house decorated with dead bugs. Simon nodded, looking at the pictures. Since you found the book in this house, he said, do you think that this is a picture of our Bogart? I never thought of that, Jared said quietly. It makes sense, though. Does it say in the book what we should do? Jared shook his head. It talks about different ways to catch it. Not catch it for real, but see it or get evidence. Jared! Simon said doubtful. Mom said to close the door and stay in here. The last thing she needs is another reason to believe that you were the one that attacked Mallory. Ooh, that's the Bogart. Household Bogart Small Wings. 1909. From the field guide. But she thinks it was me anyway. If something happens tonight, she'll think it was me too. She won't. I'll tell her you were here all night. And besides, that way we can make sure nothing happens to either one of us. What about Mallory? Jared asked. Simon shrugged. I saw her getting into bed with one of her fencing swords. I wouldn't mess with her. Yeah. Jared got into bed and opened the book again. I'm just going to read a little more. Simon nodded and got up to put the mice back in their tanks. Then he got into bed and pulled the covers over his head with a mumbled good night. As Jared read, each page took him deeper into the strange world of forest and stream, alive with creatures that seemed so close that he could almost stroke the slick, scaly flanks of the mermaids. He could almost feel the heat of the troll's breath and hear the rumble of the dwarven forges. When he turned the last page, it was late at night. Simon was bundled up so that Jared could see only the top of his head. Jared listened hard, but the only sounds In the house were the wind whistling through the roof above them and water gurgling through the pipes. No scuttling or screaming. Even Simon's beasts were asleep. Jared flipped to the page that read Bogart's delight in tormenting those they once protected, and will cause milk to sour, doors to slam, dogs to go lame, and other malicious mischief. Simon believed him, sort of anyway. But Mallory and their mom wouldn't, and besides, he and Simon were twins. It almost didn't count for anything that Simon believed him. Jared looked at the suggestion of the book. Scattering sugar or flour on the floor is one way of obtaining footprints. If he had footprints to show, then they'd have to believe him. Jared opened the door and crept downstairs. It was dark in the kitchen, and everything was quiet. He tiptoed across the cool tile to where his mother had put the flour, in an old glass apothecary jar on the countertop. He took out several handfuls and scattered them liberally on the floor. It didn't look like much. He wasn't sure how well footprints would show up in it. Maybe the Bogart wouldn't even walk across the kitchen floor. So far, it seemed to stick to moving through the walls. He thought about what he knew about Bogarts from the book. Malicious, hateful, hard to get rid of. There he is in the kitchen. Everything was quiet. In their brownie form, they were helpful and nice. They did all kinds of work for a plain old bowl of milk. Maybe... Jared went over to the fridge and poured milk into a small saucer. Maybe if he left it out, the creature would be tempted to come out of the walls and leave footprints in the flour. But when he looked at the saucer of milk there on the floor, he couldn't help feeling a little bit bad and a little bit weird at the same time. In the first place, it was weird that he was down here setting a trap for something that he didn't even know if he would have believed in 2 weeks ago. But the reason he felt bad was, well, he knew what it was like to be mad, and he knew how easy it was to get into a fight, even if you were really mad at someone else. And he thought that just maybe that was how the Bogart felt. But then he noticed something else. He'd left footprints of his own in the floor all the way from the milk back to the hall. Crud, he muttered as he went to get the broom. The light cracked on. Jared Grace! It was his mother's voice coming from the top of the stairs. Jared turned fast, but he knew how guilty he looked. Go back to bed, she said. I was just trying to catch, but she didn't let him finish. Now, mister, go. After he thought about it for a minute, he was glad she'd interrupted him. His Bogart idea probably wouldn't have been a big hit. With a look back over his shoulder at the flour dusting the floor, Jared slunk up the stairs. Oh. The kitchen was a mess.